Good evening, everybody, and welcome down to the webinar this evening. It's really quite great to see so many of you live this evening. We've got close to 100 people, which is really exciting news, isn't it, Paul?
Definitely. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. How's your week been, Paul? How's your day been? First of all,
well, the day's been good. Yeah, day's been good. Week's been fantastic, actually. Just checking through, speaking to the teams, having the weekly catch up, and this week we've seen a record number of tenancy health checks, which is fantastic for us. So lots of landlords calling in and been able to help them with lots of their queries. So yeah, good week so far.
Super stuff. Well, what I am going to do is just talk you guys through what we're kind of hoping to cover this evening. We did have a big old packet about the renters reform, which we will touch on in a bit. But first of all, what we're going to do is a little bit of a market update. So an update on both the sales and lettings market. We've got a great mortgage update with Chris Pargin Financials, who's our mortgage broker that we work with at Boydens. So he's going to share some insights on that front. We've got the renters reform bill. What do we do now? Reference to that one there. And then we've got some common landlord mistakes. So we're not going to go too heavy this evening, Paul, are we? We're just going to kind of give a bit of an insight to some of the myths maybe associated that some landlords aren't quite keeping on top of, the simpler kind of things that I think does trip many landlords up to try and keep you guys.
I think what we've looked, haven't we? We've just picked a bunch of the common things that we are contacted about, and we'll have a general discussion about those.
Yeah. So first of all, who are we? Who are me and Paul? So over 35 years of sales and letting experience between ourselves. No guessing who's got more of that experience than myself.
I had a big paper round. That's why I'm grey.
So sold in excess of £200 million worth of property between ourselves, with both professionally qualified, both on the sales and the letting side. But Paul really is the guru on the letting side, opposed to myself. And we are also kind of industry coaches and speakers. We do speak to other industry professionals about business, as well as keeping themselves compliant as well. So sharing the knowledge amongst the world of that. So that's myself and Paul, and then the company itself, Boydens. Much of you I can see in the attendees. Many of you have been with us or know us from years gone and also into the future. But Boydens, we're an established sales and lettings agency. My grandfather actually set up the firm in 1966, so 48 years ago now. As you can see there on screen, picture of me and Dad.
You look very young there, Phil.
Yeah, pre-COVID, that one, Paul. Pre-COVID. So yeah, the COVID locks are still there, and yeah, I have cut my hair since then, but not that it really looks like it. But yeah, that's as we are. Team behind ourselves. We certainly wouldn't be the company that we are today without 45 members of staff. With some fantastic knowledge amongst them, Paul. I think you'll agree on that front.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
And then main areas that are of our services, if you didn't know, we've obviously got sales, lettings and manage, which are the main parts. You've got leasehold estate management team looking after, blocks of flats, those kind of things, as well as whole residential areas. And then we also do deal with some holiday lets down on the coastal branch. So if you do have any questions on holiday lets, do put them in the chat as well. Although me and Paul probably aren't the specialists on holiday lets, we can always get Matt at the Frinton branch to answer any questions. Yeah. Whilst we're on that as well, if you have any chats or any questions, do fire them in the chat box as and when, because we want this to be as interactive as possible. We want you to benefit from this evening as much as possible. So if you've got any burning questions, then please do drop those in the chat, and we'll try and go through them as we go. So that's a little bit of a map of where we are. Obviously, we've got Frinton, Colchester, Kelvedon and Sudbury. We are also hoping to kind of branch down the A12 corridor down towards Chelmsford. We already manage quite a few properties in Chelmsford, but always looking to grow and expand the area. So if you are just outside of those areas, then please don't feel that we wouldn't be interested in assisting you on that front. So without further ado, we will crack on with a little bit of a market update. First of all, on the sales side. So the average asking price, this is asking price of property coming to the market for sale, reached a new record of £375,000, rising by 0.8% in May. So we are still seeing asking prices rise higher than they have ever been before. I would note that these aren't sales prices or physical sold prices. These are asking prices. So the number of sales being agreed during the first 4 months of the year is 17% higher than last year. We've had a fantastic month. I was just jotting up some figures, and we have actually new agreed sales just shy, I've written it down, just shy of £10 million worth of new agreed sales this month. So it has been really good, and that's even with the last week, kind of with the talk of the general election, which we will kind of mention in a moment. But we are certainly seeing sales being agreed. Physical sold prices, I feel have kind of slightly slipped back on that front. So this is a little bit of a map. So wherever you are in the country, maybe watching this evening from the northwest or something like that, you've got the average asking price in the area. As you can see, our area there, east of England, 422,364,000. I must admit, when I saw that, I almost fell off my chair, because we are definitely not based in Colchester at that kind of level. So I think it's the next slide. Let me just have a look. Yes, it is. House prices in Colchester are 100,000 less than that, 332,000 on that front. And there's a little bit of a bit of information there. Detached properties 495, terrace 275, and the overall sold price was 6% up on the peak 2021 price, which is 314. So it on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't really feel like prices have continued to go up, but it may just be that some of the larger units are selling, which is pushing that average price up, and maybe some of the smaller units aren't selling quite as quick on that front. Little bit of a market update now on the letting size. Average rental prices are now up 8.5% than a year ago. If you told me that a year ago, I would think that is crazy, because they were so high a year ago, to now be another 8.5% higher after a year is crazy. Well, it's not crazy. It's just the way that the demand runs it. The pace of the rental growth has slowed, though, and has dropped for the second quarter in a row. So actually there was 6 months of considerable growth at the back end of last year, whereas the first kind of couple of quarters or first part of this year, we have actually seen a little bit of a correction or a lowing of that kind of rental.
Stabilising now, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit of a stabilisation on that front. Rental market is still extremely busy, with 50,000 rental properties needed to bring supply back of homes to pre-pandemic levels. We saw a lot of our landlords decide to sell kind of after the pandemic, with all sorts of bits and bobs going on that front. I did also speak to the guys downstairs this afternoon, Debbie and Brian, with reference to what is kind of in our microclimate in Colchester, what is really flying out the door and what's maybe sitting around a little bit longer. And in town stuff is what is going quickly. So the main town things are quickly out of town. Bigger country ones are sitting around for a little bit longer. And we are certainly seeing, or the guys are certainly seeing, more reductions of properties that have come on, having to be reduced through other agents. So you can't just put a property on for any kind of price on the rental market and just expect to get it. You still have to be fairly accurate with that rental figure to get it rented out, basically. So some agents there are still kind of pumping those prices up and not achieving them, and obviously missing out on a month's rental income. Deb said, especially anything less than £1,000, woof, that will just fly straight out the door. Anything over that, kind of 1250 plus, that's where it tends to slow down.
It's scary what the average rental values now and how quickly they have risen over the last 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Absolutely. So, I've told you about what we're seeing in our area on that front. There's feel free, guys, just to take a picture of that. That is average yields in area and the percentage change on that front. I must admit, where we are, you're never going to get the yields of kind of the northeast, those kind of areas where you can buy a terraced house for kind of 80, 90 grand, and the yields are always going to be better there. But the capital growth that you get up there it's not the same. And also because you're getting such a small amount of rent coming in a month, if your boiler goes wrong or something like that, it takes out 6 months of your rent coming in, whereas here it's kind of 2 months worth as such. So that's something to build into your plans if you are looking to kind of invest in more property. And if someone wants to speak to us reference to that, then book in for a call and say, I don't need a tenancy health check, I actually want to talk about kind of investing in more property. So this is a new hot topic. Only a week ago, what does the election mean for the housing market? We had a chat with Tim Bannister at Rightmove, and he kind of has echoed really what we've found in our branches, that 95% of people planning to move home say they're going to continue with their plan to move. As a company, we've had absolutely no fall throughs due to the calling of the general election, which is great news, because in previous years gone by, we certainly have seen some fall throughs or panic, but at the moment, we're certainly not seeing any signs of real panic or change of people's views on that front. So, feel free to take a screenshot on that of his words on there. He talks about weathering the storms of, COVID, housing supply, interest rates, these kind of things. Buyers and sellers have weathered a lot of storm over the last couple of years. So this is just another wave to float across as such, Paul, isn't it? Really, for
business as normal. Absolutely.
So into the first kind of meaty section of the evening, Paul. Where are we? Well, I suppose what
are you, Dave? What the hell? Yeah. So renters reform.
Renters reform on it.
Renters reform. I had notes. Basically, that's where we are. So renters reform. It's been around for many years now. I think it's fair to say that it wasn't particularly popular in the early days with agents and landlords. And I think that mainly is down to the way in which it was reported. There was a lot of emphasis on banning of Section 21. It's not being able to get in possession of your property, open-ended tenancies, etc. Tenants must have pets, etc., etc. So there's a lot of scary stuff going on in the renters reform. what they didn't talk about is the other bits and pieces that were going on in the background. So there were some good things to come around from it anyway. The whole idea, obviously, to try and equal out tenant, landlord, power, etc., and make a fair rental system. But yeah, I think it came as a surprise to us all because this had cross-party support. And then when the general election was called, they were going to rush through various pieces of legislation. And the leasehold and freehold reform bill went through, and we all thought, right, well, the renters reform bill is going to go through, and then all of a sudden, no, it's been kicked into the grass. That's it. It's done. It's gone. It's no more. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, basically, as we said earlier, it's business as usual. We carry on. Is it the end of rental reform? No, it won't be. It's because it had cross-party supports. Labour are particularly vocal about trying to regulate the rental market. So they have a vested interest in trying to pick this up again. But the benefits that we do have is that they have to start again. So the bill will have to be redrafted. The bill would have to go through consultation. It would have to go through Parliament, House Lords, and back to Parliament before its royal assent. There is only a certain amount of time in which they can do that. So they're in summer recess, then I think they go into conference recess, and then it's only X amount of time for the rest of this year. So in all honesty, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We could find that local authorities decided they're going to adopt some form of the rental reform and start doing that in certain districts. We simply don't know. But what we do know is that we shall continue as we were. And then if we hear anything else, we will, of course, make everybody aware.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think that there are certain areas that if we I suppose timings wise, Paul, do you think it will push it back another 2 years as such, or do you think that it all depends really how much of a priority it becomes during the election debate, I suppose, really, isn't it?
I read a couple of days ago that Labour, if they get into power, were making a commitment to ban Section 21 within the first 100 days of power.
Okay, right.
Now,
so they'd
in order, but that's a good statement to have.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a mechanism, an apparatus for landlords to secure possession. So that means they need to upgrade Section 8. Now, the issue with the renters reform, you recall that Michael Gove said we're going to ban Section 21s before, whilst we're in power still, before the general election. Well, that went well, didn't it? But the reason they're not banning is because the court system is so far behind.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later on. But it can't cope with the current claims that are going through. Now, if you remove Section 21, which is a mandatory possession notice, so you don't need to go to court to issue the notice. If you don't get possession, you do under accelerated possession hearings, but that's not a hearing as such. If you're going to secure possession under Section 8, a court hearing is required because the judge has to sign it off. Now, you can imagine how many Section 21s are issued, and every single one of them now needs a court hearing.
Yeah.
It would just collapse. So the idea was that they were going to reform the court process, and they said, right, we won't ban Section 21, so we'll hold off and we'll reform the court process. But they were very clever. They never actually said what it is that they were doing. What does a reform look like? There wasn't any sort of granular detail. It's like, well, when we're ready, then we'll introduce it. So to say that you're going to ban Section 21 within the first 100 days of power, okay, that's grand. But what are you going to do about the court system? I think we all understand and know that to reform an established court system is going to take more than 100 days.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. It's going to take a lot of money, isn't it, Paul, to do that?
My personal view is we haven't seen the end of it, but we won't see anything for the next couple of years.
No. Okay. Thanks for that, Paul. Thanks for that. That was half of our kind of webinar. Disappeared as of last week when that happened. But if anyone does have any questions regarding the renters reform bill, then please do put those in the chat, and we'll get to those in a moment. So yeah, any questions on those, please do put those in the chat on the side. Whilst me and Paul now leave you for a moment, we've got a bit of a chat that I filmed with Chris Pargin, Pargin Financial Solutions, specifically really about landlords and what to do with reference to mortgages. So we'll leave you for about 5-10 minutes now, just to watch this through, and ask any of those questions in the chat, and we'll get back to that in a moment. All right, see you in a second. Hi there, Chris. Thank you for coming down today to chat all things mortgages with us. We appreciate your time today, and hopefully you can give us a few insights into what's been going on with the mortgage world as such. So I've got a few questions just to ask yourselves today, Chris. First one I've got is, how have recent changes in interest rates affected the mortgage market, and what trends have you kind of observed amongst your clients that you've been dealing with?
So kind of going back to the Liz Truss mini budget, September 22, the whole world changed really in terms of interest rates from there. So we saw interest rates going up a lot of instability probably, and people unsure as to what to do. So it has changed the market massively, and Bank of England base rate is now at 5.25. So it's a long way from where we were. So in terms of trends, I think across that time, people were maybe more hesitant to lock in, certainly to the longer term fixed rates. So a lot of people have wanted to sort of be able to review a couple of years after that initial review where it was up in that time. So trends wise, I think we've seen a lot of shorter term fixed rates, etc., which not right for everyone, and it is down to the individual, but it's certainly a lot more popular than it was prior to that budget taking place.
So that kind of, I suppose, leads me on to my second question I had geared up, which I think you've already half kind of answered in that first bit, Chris, was what types of mortgage products have been popular recently, and why do you think that is? And I suppose with that kind of bit of uncertainty has driven that people wanted shorter fixed rates, as you were saying. Is there any other kind of elements that you've seen within it, kind of landlords doing interest onlys or something like that? Or
I mean, that's always been quite popular with landlords anyway. In terms of the interest only deals, residential market has been slightly different, but I know we're focusing more on landlords here. So certainly the short term fixed. Another thing that we've kind of seen is people being a lot more on it in terms of when they're actually starting to review the process. So historically, we may have seen people reviewing their mortgage 2 or 3 months out of the fixed rate end date. That's now come back to kind of 6 months, which is really the earliest point that people can do it without incurring an early repayment charge. But what it enables them to do is, where rates have gone up sort of hugely, they're getting an idea on what their payments are going to look like earlier, so they can start planning for it. We do recommend it, which is something I'll come on to, because it does give a couple of opportunities to perform that review and make the most of the market really. But certainly I'd say short-term fixed, again, not for everyone, but they've been a lot more popular. What we have noticed is a bit of an adjustment in when people are starting to think about their rates and renewing things.
And I suppose getting their on the landlord side, getting that portfolio that they've got up to speed for those rent increases. Get those rent increases done through the houses or the property they've got rented out, so that it doesn't come as such a shock that there's a bit more income there to play with on that front. And in terms of regulatory kind of changes, industry developments in the past kind of ideally 3 months since our last kind of chat, but kind of even in the last I suppose couple of years, has there been any major kind of regulatory kind of changes at all, or not really?
I know you guys will talk about the kind of more lettings based regulatory changes anyway, but in terms of the mortgages, I think the big thing that we've seen on the back of the interest rates going up is that stress rates have increased. So in short, when lenders are looking at how much you can borrow, for sort of landlords will know they're looking at the rental income as opposed to someone's personal income.
Yeah.
So they'll apply a stress rate, and they will then look at the rental and the coverage on that to then approve the loan. So with interest rates having gone up hugely, those stress rates have gone up as well, which means what will have been seen as a good rental option is now not covering the loan by as much.
Yeah.
So that's been something that's changed massively. So you've kind of hit the nail on the head. I know you guys are very, very good at it. I sit downstairs in the office and listen to Brian and Debs talking about it in terms of the rental increases and rent reviews on a weekly basis. But that is because it's going to have the impact certainly on being able to potentially shop around and get a mortgage from a different lender. So maybe saving money on your mortgage as well as increasing the rental income. So it's almost acting as a double whammy. So certainly that the stress rates and how important it is something we've seen. It makes a huge difference on purchases as well. So that's another trend that we've seen a lot different.
You were saying, Chris, this was just down in the office a couple of weeks ago, about that even some banks were looking at kind of a personal kind of income in terms of the stress rates as well. Is that kind of broadly on the open market, or is that kind of a bit of a side thing that maybe some of the smaller lenders are doing to kind of get past it? Or
so it's called top slicing. Again, lenders change their criteria all the time, so I'll be careful not to sort of drop names on lenders here in case they change it in the future. But some lenders will top slice because they're aware at the moment rental incomes on their own are failing to cover the amount needed. So what they can then do is look at someone's personal situation, personal income, which can come from employment, pensions, etc., other places, as well as their personal outgoings. So things like their current mortgage and bills, etc. And if someone's got a good personal situation, they can then top slice, i.e. use some of the normal income to prop up that rental income. So it's certainly something that we look at with clients, and I'll be honest with you, I've used it where people have been purchasing properties for buy to let more so than remortgage.
But so they're entering into kind of becoming a landlord or something like that.
But certainly something that we've used a lot more where rents have been difficult to kind of get over that stress rate ones.
Interesting. So it's just something I know that we chatted about the other day. So sorry to
no, that's okay.
To throw that
that's all right. That's
on here. But what challenges? I suppose we've been talking about this is rents at the moment and interest rates. But is there any other challenges where your clients have been facing when securing a mortgage? And is there anything that, I suppose, with that top slicing you're talking about, how you can overcome that? But has there been anything else that you've noticed that have kind of been holding people back? This is even on minus from the landlord side, maybe even just on the resi side, as a bit of an update on that front as well. Really.
I mean, one thing we'll always look at is the current lender first of all, because we have, I mean, over the past couple of years, and even going back beyond that, we had sort of COVID and how that brought about changes. But people's positions change. So people will, lose jobs, start up self-employed, perhaps where they've been employed, have children, come out of work, etc., take on different commitments. So there's always variances. And one thing I always say to my clients is we'll always look at your current lender first. So if your mortgage is coming up for renewal, a huge challenge, and I'll go back to the buy-to-let market, but a huge challenge for landlords has been moving and finding a different lender to approve the loan because of what we've talked about. But we can always look at your current lender.
So look to achieve what you want from that first, and then go and explore the market, so to speak.
So when me and Mike are looking at remortgages, we'll consider that option first, and then we'll look to see if we can beat it. So we'll speak about the current range that the current lender's offering. Now, if we can't beat it for whatever reason, and it could be because of rate availability elsewhere or product availability elsewhere, or it could just be someone's personal situation, if we recommend the current lender, we don't charge a fee at all, because we always want to make sure that people are better off, or at very least the same, by using us as they would be going elsewhere or going to their current lender themselves. And then we keep on top, and some of your landlords will know we manage the mortgages as well. So 6 months out, we'll be sort of speaking to people to say you need to review. current lender is always something to consider. So that's proved a solution for many.
So in terms of just finishing up, Chris, I suppose you've said advice to your clients moving forwards with mortgages is to get on with it earlier.
Yeah.
Are there any other kind of golden nuggets that you'd want to kind of say to someone that is maybe looking at doing something with mortgages in the next little while as such? Or
yeah, I think sort of 6 months out of the fixed rate, definitely start looking to review then. You don't want to leave it too much later than that, because one thing that we're doing is we're trying to review 6 months in advance and lock in and arrange a product then, and then again review it maybe 1 to 2 months before that product takes effect.
Okay.
Then it's given people kind of 2 bites of the cherry, as it were.
Yeah, very good idea.
If rates go down, we've got a chance to swap what we're doing. If rates go up, then we've already secured something
like that.
So we're recommending that to our clients at the moment. We've talked about rent reviews and keeping on top of that, which I know you guys will be talking about, to give yourself the best position. But always speak to a broker as well, because if you're looking at purchasing a property, it's certainly something that's a lot more rent heavy. Maybe old school thinking of, I've got a 25% deposit, so I'll go out and buy a buy-to-let property, is a little bit redundant, just purely because that rent now, rather than it just being an okay investment, so it should be fine, it really does have an indication as to how much you can borrow. So plan in advance, and don't be afraid to send over sort of proposed properties and rentals to us. We'll make sure that the mortgage availability is there before people start putting in offers.
Actually get further down the line.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Well, thanks for that, Chris.
No, it's fine.
And if anybody today wants to obviously have a sit down and a chat with Chris, then details will follow following this chat on there. And also, if you want to book in for a call, then please do book in on the side table next to us. But yeah, thanks again, Chris, for your time, and hopefully you can help some of the landlords moving forwards.
All right, thank you.
So there we go, guys. Bit of an update there with Chris, and some really helpful tips I think you'll find to get on with things sooner rather than later, if you have got that fixed rate coming to the end, because we've certainly seen some landlords getting stung with a sudden change of interest rates, and crikey, the rent isn't even covering the interest in some situations. So certainly good topic there. And if you do want to speak to Chris, if you've got a remortgage coming up or any mortgage advice, even on your own home or something like that, then book a call with Chris, and he'd love to sit down with you guys and chat anything through on that front. So I just dug down a little bit, reference to, this was on the commercial trust, which was just went on yesterday, just to look at a £200,000 property, 25 years, capital repayment. So there are some decent deals about there. As you can see, kind of even down at 4.16, 4.24, but they all do have fairly large upfront costs, $4.5 grand, $7.5 grand. So they are quite high, front end heavy, I suppose, which is why why they're able to offer those slightly lower interest rates on that front. But Paul, we had a couple of questions which came in with reference to Graham. I'll have to read that in a minute whilst Paul's talking, because that looks like quite a long question on that front. Or it might be that we call you back on that one, because that looked quite long on that front. But Margot asked what legal rights for pet ownership, which I think you've answered already. But if you could answer that to
of course. So that was part of the Renters Reform Bill, where a tenant would have a statutory right to have a pet or request a pet, and a landlord couldn't just simply say no. They had to come up with a decent reason in order to say, no, that could be that mortgage doesn't allow it, or it's a leasehold property and the head lease doesn't allow it. But now the Renters Reform Bill is dead. There is the law hasn't changed. So at the minute, there is no statutory legal requirement for a tenant to have a pet. If a tenant requests a pet, a landlord can say no.
Okay. In the meantime, Anne's asked, is there anything we should be prepared for? Probably maybe get them onto kind of a longer term, 12 months, in case that happens. I think
I think that's the key thing to do. And before doing that, so the idea being is that what will happen is when any legislation such as this comes in, there will be a transitionary period. So let's assume that the Renters Reform was going to come in. We thought it was probably going to come in 1st of October. So it would affect every new tenancy from the 1st of October. And then there'll be a 12-month transitionary period. We suspect 12 months, that's normally what it is, before it affects any ongoing tenancy. And then during that 12-month period, that ongoing tenancy wouldn't be affected by the Renters Reform Bill or then Act. So my only suggestion would be review your portfolio. If you've got a stack of properties who are on periodic tenancies, then if you want some form of secure of tenure, I would personally look at trying to renew those tenancies, bind those tenants in for a fixed period of time. But before doing so, bearing in mind you can only renew review the rents once a year, review the rent. See what the market's doing. You made reference earlier, we've seen that rents are going sky high. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but there are so many properties out there where tenants are paying rent far below that of market value, and landlords are missing out on income that they are entitled to. So personally, yes, review the rents and then get your tenants signed up. Other than that, there isn't really much else to do. As I say, we just continue as we are.
Yeah. And it goes without saying, Paul, that if somebody wants us to kind of help with those renewals, then
absolutely
get in contact with ourselves, and we can certainly look at doing that. And
if you're unsure on market rents, we've got all of our staff are professionally qualified, experienced. They know the rental market like the back of their hands. Give us a call. They can give you some guidance and help you out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. In terms of the other couple of questions there, Terence and Graham, we are going to touch on court process and eviction in the next part. We're kind of talking about rent arrears and the court process. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions. Graham, yours is very specialist, so we might have to come back to you on that. But let's see how we get on in the next section, and see if we can do that. So these are the kind of the sections that we're gonna go through, which, believe it or not, are still seeing landlords making a lot of mistakes with regards to gas safety. On that, Paul, please do talk us about gas safety, as I hear time and time again landlords are in breach of this, even though they are carrying out that annual gas safety. They get all the way up to kind of a court proceedings, and then the court go, "Oh, did you do X?" No. Well, it's thrown out, so to speak. So talk us through it.
So gas safety installation use regulations have been around for quite some time now, and I don't think there's any landlord in the country that doesn't know and understand what the gas safety installation use regulations requires. It's an annual gas safety certificate to be carried out by a gas safe engineer once a year. You're checking all the landlord gas appliances and the flue. Now, what we've seen when we've done these tenancy health checks with landlords, obviously we ask the question and say, yes, we've done the gas safety. But what we've seen when we go into the detail, we're finding that there are breaches. Now, we're going to speak about gas safety, but it also relates to things like EPCs, how to rent guide, prescribed information, and it's all to do with service. So the issue that we're finding at the moment is a common one is a landlord would appoint a contractor, a gas safe registered contractor. The contractor would go to the property and agreed time with the tenant, carry out the gas safety certificate, leave the certificate on the kitchen side, go back home, send the invoice to the landlord with a copy of the certificate, landlord pays, job done. As far as the landlord's concerned, they are compliant, the gas safety has been completed. The issue comes, however, that if the landlord then, say, wanted to get possession of that property at a given time, an informed tenant, say a tenant who didn't want to leave, or a tenant who sought legal advice, one of the first questions that a legal advisor would ask would be, how was you served the gas safety? How was you served the how to rent guide? And how was you served the EPC? And if that wasn't actually served on the tenant, then unfortunately any possession claim going through at the time would be void and would need to start again. Now, what I mean by served is there needs to be a record of you actually giving that gas safety certificate to the tenant. Now, what we do, just to give you an example, as managing agents, once the gas safety certificate is completed, we then send that as a PDF on an email to each individual tenant, not just to one. And this is the key thing, because if you serve it on one tenant but not the rest, you're still in breach. So it has to be served on each individual tenant. So if you've got 3 tenants in a tenancy, each one would need to have an email to say, here is a copy of your gas safety certificate. We then record that on our system. So if we're ever questioned, so for instance, if I ever have to go to court to provide evidence on a possession claim, I can refer to the evidence to say, this is the date that we served the gas safety runner. Here is the evidence that we served it. So interestingly, what would be quite interesting to find out now, Paul, if you do a poll,
there you go.
Oh, he's done it already. How many
go,
landlords have actually served a gas safety on a tenant correctly? Because if you haven't, I would encourage you at the end of this webinar, just get it done. Because if you ever want to get possession in due course, that will be the first thing that will be raised that will stop you. So we can come back to that once people have had an opportunity to.
Interesting on that front already, Paul.
Yeah, really.
We'll come back to that in a moment. So the next one that we were going to talk about is the Tenant Fees Act on that front.
Yes.
So talk us through. Talk us through that and what you can
Tenant Fees
claim
Act
for and those kind of things. Yes. Yeah.
So again, and this comes back to like the common, we say mistakes, but common oversights that landlords that they have, because there is so much legislation. I mean, if you count it up, there's about 170 pieces of legislation that relates to housing. We have to know pretty much most of it because that's our job, but not landlords. Landlords don't especially know all of it. And the Tenant Fees Act back in June 2019 popped on our door and basically said, you can't charge anything other than rent and interest on any late payment. In fact, the first edition said you couldn't even charge rent. They forgot about charging rent and they quickly amended that. But you can't charge anything other than rent and interest on late payments. Now, there are some tenancies are set up where a tenant will pay the rent, but the landlord will pay the utility and recharge the utility back to the tenant. So let's assume, for instance, your rent's £800 and the landlord pays the electric and recharges that back to the tenant at £25 a month. That is actually unlawful. So if that tenant stopped paying that £25 a month, there isn't a huge amount the landlord can do about it because it goes against the Tenant Fees Act. What should happen is that the rent in the tenancy agreement should state that, again, assuming the rent's 800, the rent will be charged at 825. So you've got your 800 and then your 25 for the electric, including electric. Now that way, if the tenant stops paying, you can go down the standard process of Section 8 under the Housing Act to secure possession of property or look to recover the rent arrears because it's rent arrears. So we're seeing that a lot. As I mentioned, we were doing a lot of tenancy health checks this week, and this one has come up quite a bit where the landlords are still charging. And the issue is that whilst the tenant might not have issue with it now, they may in time, and it means that they can actually look to seek to recover all of the fees, i.e. the £25 that they've been paying from the landlord. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. So if you can imagine, this came back in 2019, June 2019. If a tenant's been doing that for that long, and the relationship might break down for whatever reason, and that tenant all of a sudden establishes, oh, I can look to recover that, that could hurt a landlord quite a lot. And because you have legislation there to support it, chances are they would win.
So Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Just going back to the poll there, we've got out of the 100 or so that we've got here, we've got 48% say they are serving it correctly. So well done, those guys. Good to hear. We've got 24% saying no, and then we've got 27% saying not sure. So if you're in one of those two kind of bottom groups, then certainly get in contact with ourselves, and we can certainly help you kind of talk through it. Oh, we've had a slight change. Not sure's gone down and yes has gone up. So if you need any assistance on that, or want to talk to us about it a little bit slower and a little bit kind of in time.
The good thing is you can recover from this. You can just get it served, and you're okay. There are certain things that have to be served at the beginning of the tenancy, and if you haven't done it, then you can't do it retrospectively. The gas safety you can get it done retrospectively.
Absolutely. A big issue, Paul, as you know, that we deal with time and time again is helping self-managing landlords sort out their rent arrears. So talk to us. This is kind of a bit of a hot potato. No one wants rent arrears on their property. So do talk to us the best process for dealing with these and really how to avoid them from building up, really, I suppose.
Yeah, of course.
And that
so,
kind of thing.
Obviously we're renting the properties for a reason. So rent arrears and the management of rent arrears is so important. Now, just to put this into some context, I saw some questions earlier about how long it takes to go for the court. I'm going to give you an example of a court case I went on recently. Now, we're very strict with rent arrears. We issue as soon as we possibly can, which is day 28. We're on the we're issuing Section 8, etc. So you'd imagine we've jumped on this particular case straight away. I didn't get in front of the judge until 6 months after we issued. Now, the judge gave the standard 14-day possession notice, which they generally give. Okay, so that's fine. So it's 6 months, 14 days. So it was 6.5 months. At the end of those 14 days, the tenant didn't vacate. Now, you can't enforce a possession order. The judge has to do that. So then we request the judge appoint a court bailiff. Just like the courts, the bailiffs department are so far behind, and there isn't enough bailiffs. We get bailiffs coming down from Romford to cover, and coming from out of county to cover. But there's just not enough of them around. So we requested the bailiff. That took some time for the paper to be rubber stamped. I think it was a couple of weeks. So we're now at 7 months. The court bailiff phoned us and said, right, well, I can't get there for 8 weeks. So that's another 2 months. So so what we now? We're 7, 8, 9. We're at 9 months now. Fortunately, this landlord had a rent guarantee for us, so it was fine with them. But as you can imagine, if you didn't have any form of rental protection coming in, you are 9 months down without any rental income. Not only that, you then have the added costs of solicitors to issue the Section 8. You'll have the added cost of the solicitor to go to court to represent you. You'll have the added cost of the court fees, which I might add have just gone up 10%. The bailiff fees also just gone up 10%. It just snowballs. And I did a quick tot up just to see what it would have cost this landlord over that period of time. And we got to a staggering figure of about £10,500.
Wow.
Exactly. Now, the thing you got to remember as well is that a landlord can't just say, right, well, I'm going to stop being a landlord. I'm going to stop managing this property maintenance. That still has to continue.
Got all your obligations there, haven't you?
Exactly. You can't stop. So you're having additional expenditure going out, but you don't have the expenditure. Sorry, you don't have the income coming in to replace it to be able to move on, and it's just a horrible situation. So my only advice to be, I mean, we see this quite a lot where a landlord say, oh well, my mate Tim is a tenant. He's phoned me up. He's going to be a couple of weeks late with his rent, so I didn't do anything about it. Right? Okay. That couple of weeks has turned into another couple of weeks because there's work issues, blah blah blah, and it's got to about 6-8 weeks, and they've done nothing with it. And the problem that you've then got is that if they'd started the process right at the beginning, regardless of what the tenant was saying, you're creating evidence in order to support your claim when you move forward. Now, we are constantly in communication with tenants who are in arrears, and what we find is that it isn't the case of a tenant doesn't want to pay. More often than not, it's a tenant can't pay, and that could be a number of different reasons. It could be work, ill health, whatever it might be. And we will work with them as much as we possibly can. But in addition to that, we're also taking credit control action in the background. So we're issuing the standard credit control letters, and we're getting to the point where we can issue the Section 8. We would never hold off issuers Section 8 on a promise to pay.
No.
You always do that. You can always invalidate it afterwards, and you don't have to go through with it. But if you don't issue it, you are just delaying the whole process. Now, the process we use is we contact a tenant on day 3. It's a simple reminder. Day 5, day 7, day 14, day 21, and day 28. They are your touch points in which you contact someone. And there's a rule of thumb: if you've got rent arrears that are older than 14 days, you have what we call in the industry a bad debt. And that is basically, that's probably going to be a debt that is going to continue, and you're going to have to take some form of legal action. More often than not, they are the low-level debts, and they get resolved within 7 days, because it might be, oh, I forgot to set up the standing order, or the standing order was set up the one day, or I just simply forgot to pay you. I'm so sorry, here's the payment. So it's important. My advice would be jump on any credit control with immediate effect. Now, a common misunderstanding as well is a Section 8 is issued at 2 months rent arrears. The majority of rent is charged monthly in advance. So let's assume it's the 1st of March, your tenant falls into arrears. Yeah. Come the 1st of April, that is now 2 months rent arrears. That's when you can issue a Section 8. You do not have to wait until the end of April to be owed the 2 full months, because it's been raised in advance. So you can issue it at the 1st of April. Some landlords we found are actually leaving it until the end of April to then raise, and they're putting themselves a month behind.
Super stuff. Thank you very much, Paul. I'm just fending a few questions. Do put your questions in there. I'm moving them across to the questions answer section on the side, so I don't think I'm deleting them, guys. We are going to get through to those. So I suppose with in line with rent arrears, Paul, managing rent increases. We know, as me and Chris spoke earlier, reference to mortgages, it is pivotal to keep on top of those rent increases, especially on the sales side, which I'm kind of majority involved in. We see that if you don't keep on top of tenants' rent, when it comes to actually serving them notices to get them out, they are so out of touch with the current market. As I said earlier, 8.5% over the last year. If you haven't put it up for the last 5 years, 10 years, they're going to be so out of touch with what realistically rents are nowadays that they will more likely end up sitting for eviction rather than going out. So that's my kind of take on it on the more the sales front of it. But Paul, please do share your knowledge as well on your thoughts on it. Really.
Yeah, I'll give you another story
as well. How to do it as well. Yeah,
because we hear a lot where we see, well, I've had my tenant for ages and they're so good, they look after property. I don't feel like I can increase the rent, and you're absolutely right, Phil. That then creates this falseness about. So if the position of the landlord were to change at any given point, they wanted to sell it. Well, if they wanted to sell it as an investment with the tenant in situ, it wouldn't yield well, which means it wouldn't attract an investment buyer, which means that then you'd need to increase the rent from here to here. And I can assure you, at the time when you want full cooperation with your tenant to do viewings and you do a massive rental increase, they're not going to be too happy. And that's what we see. But the story that we've got is that some time ago, we did a check, a health check with a landlord, and that landlord had tenant-side properties. She'd had tenants in situ for a number of years. No issue with the tenants. They were looking after the property absolutely fine, but they were paying well below market rates. And she sort of reached out to us and said, can you help us? And we said, no problem at all. So we got involved, and we spoke to the tenants, and we negotiated £100 additional rent on each of the 10 properties. So that landlord now benefited from £1,000 extra a month, so another £12,000 a year in terms of revenue. And I might add that every single one of those tenants had no issue with paying that additional. They knew what, they're not silly. They know, they're always on the portals. They know what the rent is like. But the benefit being is that the landlord is then able to utilise that additional revenue to upgrade the bathroom, upgrade the kitchens, which meant, and then sign the tenants in for even longer, which meant not only was she increasing the value of the property by upgrading it, she was then signing in the tenants for longer at a higher increased rent. So it was just win-win-win.
Yeah.
So we do see it's not, whilst it's lovely that some landlords go, I don't want to increase my rent because my tenant's so lovely, they do create this problem where the tenants could then be out of touch. And if they ever had to move from their property, they simply couldn't afford it. And then they would sit, and that then creates a financial situation for the landlord and stops the landlord doing what it is that they want to do.
It was also, Paul, it was great to see that particular landlord, her worries left her as well, because she also said to us, okay, you've managed to get that much more for me, take over the management, make sure I'm fully compliant. So she can kind of disappear off into the sunset, so to speak, and enjoy her life and just enjoy the rent coming and not having to deal with any of the maintenance, none of the legislation, anything like that. And she's actually better off for it. So
and still be better off, So
that was a really nice thing to have helped her with, I must admit, which was one of the many success stories that we've had. If you guys do want any help on that as well, I'm going to just drop in a call to action here to book a tenancy health check. So do book in there. There's timings on there, so book through in there whilst me and Paul talk about the last part of the slide here. I think, Paul, you're going to potentially
I was just going to talk about a little bit more about rent reviews, if I may, and the two options available to you to increase your rent. Well, the first one is obviously to create a new tenancy agreement. So if your fixed term is coming up for renewal, you can renew the tenancy and negotiate an increased rent as part of that. The second one is if you have a contractually periodic tenancy agreement, and what we mean by that is one that rolls over month to month to month. You can issue what's called a Section 13 notice, which currently has a 1 month notice period. And in that, you basically say to the tenant, your rent is this, we are going to put it up to this, and the tenant gets a month's notice of that, and then they are required to pay the additional rent thereafter. We can help do either, but it really depends on the state of your tenancy. If you have a fixed term tenancy, you cannot increase the rent during the fixed term. You can't do that. You can increase it on the anniversary, but not during fixed term.
Super stuff. Thanks for the clarification on that one, Paul. Bit of a weird one here, but I know that a lot of landlords, and I think there's a bit of a misconception, there has been for a number of years actually, with reference to white goods. So if Paul, and not just with landlords, we've seen and had discussions with other people actually in the industry about white goods and those kind of things, haven't we, Paul? Even in the last kind of 3 months. So yeah, just it's a smallish thing, but yeah, if you could just clarify the stance with reference to white goods liability, Paul, on that.
It's a small thing, you're right, but it is something that comes up on a regular basis, and it can snowball very quickly to cause other problems. So white goods, I mean, what we mean by white goods are things like washing machines, cookers, fridge freezers, etc. They could be freestanding, they could be integrated, whatever it might be. But as a rule of thumb, if a landlord is supplying a white good in a property, they are responsible to ensure that A, that is safe, and B, any maintenance required is carried out. What we've seen in the past is some landlords trying to be a little bit clever, trying to divert and what we call gift the appliance to the tenant in order to remove themselves from their contractual liabilities. You can't do that. There's the contractual liability, and then there's the Supply of Goods Act. The simple fact is, if you are providing the white good, you need to maintain it. And again, another little story on this one. There's something that a landlord simply not maintaining a white good got completely out of control, where the tenant and the landlord were at heads with each other. Tenant got the hump, reported it to the local authority. Local housing officer visited the property, and that's not something you want, because when they visit the property, you can assure yourself that they will be doing a full 29-point SRS visit, and they will literally check everything. And they did. And they found out that there wasn't sufficient space heating. There were various problems with the property. And they contacted the landlord. The landlord's like, no, I'm not interested in this, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden the landlord found himself with a works order from the local authority where they had appointed a contractor, didn't get any quotes or anything like that. They just used their contractor. He was responsible for that cost. He was responsible for the fine. And then he had the threats of a rent repayment order against him. And he still had to fix the washing machine. So, what could have been, I don't know, a couple of £100 turned out to be thousands of pounds worth of expenditure for him. So it is something, you need to maintain your contractual liabilities, because if you move away from them, tenants can very quickly get agitated and annoyed, and there are avenues that they can go down that are available to them free of charge. And if they go to any sort of citizens' advice or anything like that, they will be referred to the local authority. The local authority will jump on it quickly. Really common misconception, that one, Paul. So that's why we put it in there for you guys, just to kind of clear up on that front, because of seems small, but like that chap there, thousands of pounds of out of control. Yeah, it really can. So I'm going to implored you more. I know that we said that we weren't going to keep you guys for much more than an hour today, and we've just ticked over to an hour and 2 minutes. So don't want to keep you guys for too long, but if you do have any other questions, then do ping that across. What we're going to do now, Paul, is we're just going to do a bit of a quick recce through these questions, see how many we can get through in the next few minutes. Basil's asked, if you let your property through a limited company, is there any difference to the legislation? It depends what kind of tenancy you have. So a limited company can issue an assured short hold tenancy, or perhaps Basil, we need to get in touch with you just to get a little bit more information so we can accurately answer that question, because it depends on the kind of tenancy that you've got, whether it's a non-housing ed tenancy or whether it's an assured short hold tenancy. And there'll be tax implications as well after with reference to your income, those kind of things, Basil. So there is a difference, but not an immediate difference. I think, Paul, would be the answer, but obviously on tax. But Basil, we can certainly we'll reach out to Basil after to get a bit more information on that one. Paul Fleming, if a tenant is clearly under severe financial pressure partway through a rental term and clearly needs to vacate, is this possible in terms of ease of the process? Absolutely, Paul. Break of tenancy, if you I mean, you so a tenancy agreement is a contract between two parties, and a landlord and tenant. So if you have a tenant who's in dire situation where they're financially they're struggling and they can't afford the rent, then the landlord needs to make a sensible decision, don't they? They can either allow that tenant to sit and the rent arrears to accrue. They go to court, they get a possession order, they get a money judgment, then they've got to try and enforce the money judgment. The tenant could then apply for breathing space, which means no creditors can chase them for a period of time. Landlord then has to pay to enforce the money judgment and go through the whole court process, or the landlord can speak to the tenant and they can agree to just end the tenancy there and then. So one of the things that we do is obviously we talk to landlords and tenants, and sometimes it's more financially beneficial for a landlord to actually say to the tenant, look, you're clearly struggling. If you're in agreement, what we'll do is you sign over the deposit to me, I'll let you go, we'll call it quits. And that, at least that way, it saves. I mean, we made reference to earlier, didn't we? Sort of 9 months waiting, and then once, as I say, that's not it, because once you have the money judgment, you've then got to enforce it and pay for it to be enforced and get like £2 a week or whatever it might be. It's all negotiation on that front, isn't it, really, in a way, Paul? And Wiseman, fixed period of time, I think we're talking about renewals here. How long can one renew for? How long can you renew a tenancy for? Yes. So currently you can renew a short hold tenancy for a maximum 3 years before it becomes a deed. So 3 years, but you can do 12 months or 24. I wouldn't recommend doing 3 years. None of us know what's going on, and you can only rent will get out of date then. Yes, there will be a rent review clause within the tenancy agreement on an annual basis, but that'll be percentage driven, and we've found that the percentage driven one doesn't keep up anywhere near what the rents increases are at the moment. So my advice would be, 12, tops 24 months. If you're going to go more than 12, I would always suggest popping in a break clause just to protect your position.
Ian here, does your standard lease regarding flats exclude pets?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it basically says the tenant is required to seek landlord permission.
Mm-hmm. And then often it's actually freeholders' permission as of your lease in a flat. Yeah. So a lot of them they'll have restrictions in place anyway on that front. So Deborah Cole, if you have a managing agent on your property, can they serve the gas safety on your behalf? Yes, and that's what we do. We take over on that front. And also the EICR, is the EICR safety the same as the gas safe? Does that have to be served in the same way, Paul?
So the regulations state that an EICR has to be served, or a completed EICR has to be served on a tenant within 28 days of completion.
Super stuff. And they're 5 years, aren't they?
5 years.
5 years.
5 years.
Yep. Margot, can leaseholders pay service charge monthly as a choice? That's a leasehold estate management question. That'll be depicted in your lease.
Yeah. So solely dependent on the lease.
Some of the older leases say it has to be on an annual basis, so it will depend on what block you own, and it will be a stipulation in the lease there, which obviously is a different matter on that front. Do we charge a late payment fee to tenants?
You can't. It's illegal. Tenant fee ban. So there used to be, everybody used to charge, I think it was a standard £25 a late payment fee, but that was actually, that's now unlawful since the Tenant Fees Act 2019.
Super stuff. Graham Cornhill, does Boydens help landlords work with lawyers for Section 8 and court proceedings, or without lawyers?
So it depends. If you're a managed landlord and you have a rent guarantee warranty with us, we literally do everything. So you don't have to get involved. If you're a self-managing landlord, we can guide you, but we wouldn't be able to do it for you because we don't have signed terms saying that we are the representative of you. So we could tell you what to do. We could give you a few telephone numbers of solicitors and guide you, but you would need to do it yourself. All managed and part managed landlords, we sort it all out for you.
Mm-hmm. So staff, that's Graham. Elaine, do fire alarms and CO2 detectors need to be hardwired in?
No.
On an AST, they don't. HMO, obviously, they do. So we're not HMO specialists at the moment. It's something we want to grow into, but yeah, on an AST, they don't need to be.
They need to be. So they need to be checked on the first stage of the tenancy, and it is the responsibility of the tenant to check throughout the duration of the tenancy. But the landlord has a duty of care to make sure that the tenant is checking, which is one of the reasons it's important to do regular routine visits, so you can check in with the tenant and also check it yourself, record it, because then you're completely covered.
Thomas asked another one. White goods, how often is PAT testing required, please? I believe this is a bit of a grey area.
Yeah, it is a little bit. So it's my understanding, it isn't officially a legal requirement. It's best practice. However, if you're carrying out electrical installation certificate report, they check about 25% of the hardwire, which obviously services the appliance. The PAT testing, when I've spoken to many electricians over many years, and they've said, oh yeah, anybody can do it. Anybody with a brain can do it. You just basically look to see if the plug is split, make sure it's got a socket, like a switch. There's no cracks in it and there's no burn marks. So I think that if just applying a sensible head is sufficient, if you can show that you've attended a property, yes, that's clearly safe, it's all been recorded as safe, then you're good to go.
Bratic's got a bit of a funny one here. Well, not funny, but it's a bit of a hard one, I think, Paul. What can I do as a landlord if my tenant keeps physically removing smoke detectors from my property, either the entire device or the batteries?
Oh, God.
Make record of it, and
right. So this is awkward because it's a landlord requirement, and you can't remove yourself from a landlord requirement. So landlords will be seen as by any form of authority as being the professional person, just as we are with agents, and to be doing the best they possibly can to ensure that that property is safe. Now, let's assume that their tenant has removed the battery, a fire happens, the smoke alarm doesn't go off, they establish the smoke alarm doesn't come off. How can you prove tenant dead? Can't do anything about that. How can you prove that your tenant has kept removing the batteries? I think the issue that you have there is a problematic tenant. And personally, my advice to you for your own due diligence and sanity and safety would be to remove that tenant.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Well done. One final question here from Nelly, which is a little bit of a maintenance one. Just responsibility of a tenant, which I think we are going to cover a bit more in detail on the next webinar next quarter. General responsibilities of tenants' obligations in kind of what they should and shouldn't do, as opposed to landlord's obligations. So you've kind of whetting the appetite for our next one there, Nelly. But cleaning gutters and also sealant in the bathrooms and kitchens, Paul. Who's responsible?
Who's responsible? Right. Okay. So let's start with gutters first. So we need to refer back to what's called Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenant Act, which is the mandatory repairing requirements of all landlords. Then you can refer to the tenancy agreement, which will stipulate what it is the tenant's responsible for. Guttering is to do with the fabric of the building, so that will fall under Section 11 of the Landlord and Tenant Act. Now, if you're another thing to consider as well, if you're sending a tenant up a ladder, to clear out some guttering, have you taught the tenant how to use a ladder? Have you put the tenant through working at heights or anything like that? These are all health and safety issues. If your tenant were to fall from said ladder trying to clear the gutters that you've asked them to clear, there is a claim coming your way. You can guarantee that. So gutters is the responsibility of a landlord under Section 11 Landlord and Tenant Act. Moving on to sealant, that is the responsibility. The replacement of the sealant is the responsibility of the landlord. Making sure, so if your tenant moved in and that property, say the bathroom's been freshly sealed and it looks all fine and lovely and everything, and at the end of that tenancy, the tenant's allowed it to go mouldy because they haven't wiped it down, etc., you can look to reclaim the cost of replacing that sealant because it hasn't been returned in the condition in which it was given. If the sealant is going mouldy because there isn't enough ventilation, because the extractor fan isn't working, because the property's old, because there's no trickle vents in the windows, whatever it might be, there is an argument that you would be responsible for the ongoing maintenance. But generally, as a maintenance issue, it's your responsibility unless the tenant has allowed it to deteriorate.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Paul Fleming there. Yep, we are absolutely going to run this quarterly. So we will get the next date in the diary probably next week as to when that'll be. And if there's anything that you guys do want us to cover on the next one, please do tell us. And if we get kind of 5 people saying, yeah, I'd really like for you to cover obligations or those kind of things, then we'll certainly build a section into the webinar with it. So it goes to say thank you very much, guys, for coming this evening. We'll leave you with a bit of a call to action there to book in for your tenancy health check if you think that anything that we've discussed today you'd like any more questions or queries or a bit of a deep dive into your current managed property, then please do book in on that one. I'll leave that up there for a couple of minutes, but I think thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's great to see so many of you here. You know, we've just dropped underneath 100 now, but to have 100 people attend this has been really fantastic, and I hope it's been useful for you guys at home as well. All right, and there will be a recording back of this, so if you do want to cut back to it, that'll be sent out to you guys in the next couple of days. So anything to add, Paul?
I was going to say, I would just add, we only have a certain amount of slots available for the tenancy health checks. We've got a bank of qualified, very experienced people on hand who can help you. It's free of charge. We normally charge £99, but if you're attending tonight, it's free of charge. There's no obligation. All I would say is, a lot of landlords we speak to say, yes, I'm compliant. And we say, look, just have a chat with us. And then they walk away going, Christ, you saved me £3,500 worth of fines here. Because they don't know what they don't know. Have the call, make the call, let someone talk to you, because even if you walk away and say, do you know what, I know 100% I am compliant, great. Yeah. At least you then know. But as I say, if you do don't delay, get yourself booked in.
Yeah, super stuff. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, and
thanks, everyone.
Hopefully we'll see you in 3 months' time. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening. Bye.